Amen. Why don't you take your seat, church? And as you take your seat, take your Bible. And let's turn in God's Word as we continue to worship Him through the study of His Word to the book of 2 Timothy. I thought as this is going to be the first Sunday of the year, the first communion of the year, it's always an appropriate time for me to really make sure that we get our focus where it needs to be to head forward into a new year. And at that time, you are probably grabbing a piece of paper, it may be physically or mentally or your device, and you are maybe looking at a scratched piece of paper kind of like this. And it is a wonderful beginning each year. It's kind of like a new year and a fresh start. But I want you to notice something I put on my calendar here as I did this. This is the first Sunday of the year. That means this is day number 1, and there's only 364 left. Now, most people, when they think about these New Year resolutions and things, and they look at their calendar, they're not thinking about 364 days, right? All they're thinking about is right now. It's kind of like this little cartoon where this little dog says, so what exactly is a New Year's resolution? It's a to-do list for the first week of January. Maybe you find yourself like that, or like these two ladies who are having this conversation. She says, this year I'm serious about my resolution to go to the gym. Last year I went only twice, once to join and once to renew. And that's kind of typically how we think about the new year. It's these resolutions, these commitments to get started, and unfortunately for all of us, they don't seem to last but a few weeks, and then they're gone. So here's what I would like to do on this Sunday of the first year of our year going forward. I would like to look beyond just the first days of January. What I really want to look at is December 2017. I want you to look down the road and think down the road about, so what would it look like at the end of the year? In other words, I want you to think with me this morning about what it looks like, not just to begin, but to finish, and to finish well. It's one thing to finish the year, but it's another thing to finish well. And I was thinking about this as I was watching the bowl games yesterday. Ladies, that's football, okay? And I was watching the Clemson-Ohio State game, the Fiesta Bowl, and my mind went back to the year 2003 and another Fiesta Bowl that Ohio State was in that year. And in that day, right before they went out having talked about their game plan, their head coach, Jim Tressel, asked this question of his team. How do you want to be remembered? That was the challenge after the game plan had all been laid out, that he challenged them. How do you want to be remembered? Not just how are we going to play today, but after it's all over, when we come to the end, how do you want to be remembered? Well, that talk, at least that day, must have worked for Ohio State, because it was the time in which they did an upset over the Miami Hurricanes, who had had a 34 non-losing streak game. Won 34 games, never been beaten. Ohio State comes in there and beats them. And that's how they were remembered in 2003. They're not remembered that way yesterday, but that's how they were remembered then. And that's a great question for us to consider as you think not just about starting a new year, but really the whole year. And to really think for just a moment, how do you want to be remembered? What do you really hope, if you could put it down on that pad, what do you really hope that people will say about you after this year is over? Or let's even look at it this way. We read in Ecclesiastes, there's a possibility that life could end for some people in this year. And what do you want them to remember about you? What do you hope they will think about you? If they were to summarize your 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 years of your life, what would you want them to remember about you? That's a very searching question, because we tend to think right now rather than the end. One of the things, I know it's a little odd, strange, but one of the things Pam and I like to do when we're in little quaint towns is to go to graveyards. And I know you're going to say, this is the weirdest thing I've ever heard. My pastor goes to graveyards. Oh, there's a reason I like to go to graveyards. Because graveyards, especially some of these old graveyards, show how little life was for some people and how quickly they were gone. and to read their epitaphs and to see what they wanted people to remember about them. That's kind of what epitaphs and headstones at a graveyard do, right? They are just a way of saying, I hope you remember this about me now that I am gone. One of my most favorite stories about tombstones was one I heard James Dobson give one time, where his parents were talking about what they wanted on their tombstones. And his dad said, just put on mine, he loved. That's what I want you to remember about me. He loved. Turned to his mom and said, what do you want me to put on yours? I told you I was sick. But tombstones are interesting to me. They're really interesting because they're kind of like the final word about you, right? I just, because I have this kind of weird wondering of what people want to be remembered about and what tombstones say, and I haven't figured out what I want to put on mine yet, okay? I don't know what that is. But I did just kind of do a search one time to see what people had put on their tombstones, and some of these were just humorous to me. One of them in New Mexico has this headstone that says, here lies John Yeast. Pardon me for not rising. Right? In Pennsylvania, there was one that said, here lies the body of Jonathan Blake, stepped on the gas instead of the brake, right? And only in Alabama would this one be said, okay? Peas is not here, only the pod. P shelled out and went home to God. I mean, most of them have little sayings like loving Father, beloved mother, darling son, rest in peace, sleep in Jesus, and so on. But let me just ask you, so back to that question, so how do you want to be remembered? How will you be remembered? What is it that you hope that you'll be aiming for as you go forward in this year that you will be remembered for? Well, what if we asked the Apostle Paul? What if he said, Paul, you're at the end of your life. What is it you want to be most remembered for? We have no doubt, we don't have to even guess or wonder what he would say, because it's found right there in the text you have opened up in 2 Timothy chapter 4 in verses 6 through 8. And I want to remind you that this section is the last section of Paul's writings. He is writing from a Roman jail with the certain knowledge that he would soon be dead. And as he is sitting there in that jail, he looks back at his journey, and then he looks forward to what is ahead. And what he describes here in these verses, I believe, no matter what you put on that list in your mind or on that piece of paper as you go forward with a fresh start in a new year, whatever you put on that list has to include what Paul had on his. It has to be what is the overarching, driving focus as you look back and as you look forward. Let me read for you the text in 2 Timothy 4, verses 6 through 8. For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have, this is looking back, fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. Now he looks forward, verse 8. In the future, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, and this is where you and I get to come in, but also to all who have loved his appearing. Now what I want to do from this text is I want us to think about this life of the Apostle Paul and what he is going to be remembered for. I ran across an interesting study done by Howard Hendricks from Dallas Theological Seminary some time ago, where he did a study of the men and women in the Bible. And in that study that he did, he said there are 100 lives recorded in the Bible for us to read about. That means you can open the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and there are at least 100 lives of men and women that you can read about. And then he made this shocking statement and summary about that study. He said, 2/3 of those men and women, listen, 2/3 out of 100 ended poorly. Ended poorly. Their life did not end well. Some turned to immorality. Others drifted away from the faith. or they ended their life in a backslidden condition. 2/3 of them. But the Apostle Paul was not one of them. He is one of those in the 1/3 group that literally finished well. And he was remembered by what he wrote right here in this text. So what is it that we want to remember about ourselves? What is it we want others to know is true of us? Before we look at that, can I just throw this little statement out there that I think is so very, very important? Finishing well does not happen by accident. As you start here the first Sunday of January in 2017, and we think about what would it look like when we come to the end of December this year, what will those resolutions, those desires, those passions, those things we want to do, what will they look like in December 2017 as we end that year or we end our life? That will not happen by accident. It won't just kind of some way happen. Whatever it is you pursue, whatever drives you to do those things, like what we're going to see from the Apostle Paul, is something that happens because of intentionality. Purposefully intending to do that. I'm going to help you with that at the end of the message to show you what I want you to do, to help you each day keep moving forward to a good end and to be remembered in a way that really, truly is good. All right, let's talk about it, all right? Here's the first thing. If you open the text there, we're going to see, if you're going to finish well, you have to live with a present, right now, in this day, realization. A present realization. In other words, forget about down the road right now. Forget about looking back right now. Just talk about today. Right now, in your day, if you are going to finish well today, there's something that should be on your mind right now. And the Apostle Paul in this passage here had two things that were on his mind and that he could say governed his life. The first one I'm going to call a principle. It was the principle of my life is an offering. Notice that in the text in verse 6. For I am already being poured out as a drink offering. Now just pause right there. When Paul says he's being poured out as a drink offering, what he is thinking back to is the Old Testament. Right? Because in the Old Testament, that whole sacrificial system where you brought your sacrifice, you brought your animals, there was a portion of that in which there was what was called a drink offering. In the law of God, it mandated that the worshiper brought an offering. Part of it, as he brought it, was consumed on the altar. It was a whole burnt offering. It all went up. It was all consumed. But then there were sometimes you brought an offering that some was given up on as an offering, and others, part of the offering was given to the priest. That was the way God sustained the priest, and it was the way God helped to care for and support the priest. So there was this sense in which some offerings had an offering that went completely up to God, some went up to God, and some then on other offerings were given to the priest, and he would use it for his own self. But when the offering was consumed by fire, right, the worshiper would then sometimes pour a glass of wine over the hot coals that were there. It was called a drink offering. And when he did it, it's like when you on the grill squirt some water on those coals or whatever, or you're trying to put out a fire, what happens? A smoke goes up. And so the drink offering was a sense in which after he had offered up this offering, took his wine, as it were, and he pours it over those coals, that the smell of that offering and the aroma of the smoke would arise as if to say to God, I want this to be pleasing to you. I want this to smell good to you. And here the Apostle Paul is saying here that he is like that wine poured out. The wine is completely consumed, completely evaporated. The priest doesn't get any of it. He doesn't get any of it. It goes up in the smoke to God. And he's saying, God, I want my life to be like this offering in which I am giving you all 100%, nothing held back, and I want it to be a sweet aroma to you. That is the principle that the Apostle Paul lived with all the days of his life. He was, as it were, symbolically saying that he was a drink offering. And here at the end of his life, he is saying that this final day is coming, and it's just going to be another day for me to say, God, here I am. It's a bad day. From a human's perspective, he's going to have his head whacked off by Nero. But it's a great day because he is thinking in terms of what his life really counted for. That when you looked at his life, you would think of him as one who is a drink offering. As I said, Nero in just a short while will have Paul put to death for the gospel, and this is going to be, in Paul's mind, a drink offering. Paul had given all of his life for Christ a long time ago. He gave him his career, his money, his relationships, his time, his heart, his future, everything. He lived his whole life for Christ, and dying for the gospel was just a final thing to do for Christ. So here's the question. As you want to finish well, you got to think about how you're living right now. Or are you thinking right now of your life that you want to just pour it all out for him? I mean, think about what is it that holds you back from doing that? I mean, if you're going to finish well, this principle has to get nailed down in your life. Every day you get up, it's a chance to say, here I am, Lord, whatever my circumstances are, whatever is ahead of me, whatever you call me to, I'm just going to pour it out, and it's going to come up like a sweet smell to you. Now, others may not like it. They may not see anything valuable to it, but I can tell you that aroma is going to, as it were, symbolically rise up to God, and he is going to be well pleased with that. It's like the song that we sing, and we'll sing at the end of this service today, by the missionary David Livingston. I only have one life. Nail that one down, brothers and sisters. I don't care who you are. You only get one life. I only have one life, and that will soon be past. I want my life to count for Christ. What's done by him will last. So that's the principle. The second thing that was on his mind was a perspective. I am departing. He says there in the last part of verse 6, and the time of my departure has come. Now, you just want to circle that word, or at least remember this in your head. This is such an amazing thought in Paul's mind. Right now, presently, I'm thinking about this principle of my life. It's all given up for God as a drink offering. And you know what? My life is going to come to an end. In fact, I know I'm within days of it coming to an end. I am going to depart. Now, what does that mean when he says that he is going to depart? Three pictures should come to your mind in this Greek word here. First of all, it is a picture of a ship. A picture of a ship hoisting the anchor, raising the sails, leaving the harbor, and setting sail for a distant port. That's what the word departure means. So if you lived in that day, you would say, oh, there goes that ship. It is departing. It is pulling up the sail. It is leaving the harbor and setting sail for a distant port. How many of you ever watched ships pull off? You ever seen them pull off? You ever heard what people say? Standing there, I don't know, they say it. There she goes, right? There she goes. And that's exactly what departing, leaving this world for a believer is like. There she goes. But think about this on the other side of the departing. When that ship sets sail and it departs, it's going to another port. On the other side of the port, you're saying, here she comes. And for a believer, yes, it is leaving this world. That's his perspective. That's what's on his mind. I'm going to depart. But you know what? It's like leaving the ship, and the ship leaving, and people saying, there he goes. But on the other side in eternity, they're saying, here he comes. That's the picture. And that's what Paul's thinking. I mean, his life is not about here. His life is not about stuff right here. Oh, he may get to go places, do things, and have things, and God may bless him. He can be abounding and he can be abased, but his life is not about here. When he thinks about his life, he's thinking, hey, the principle is I'm a drink offering, and the perspective is I'm going to leave this world. And when I do, it's going to be like a ship departing the port and headed to the next one. Here's a second word that describes this word departure, and it's a picture of an army. I love this one. This word depart refers to an army that has made camp near a battlefield. And to depart meant they were breaking camp, leaving the battlefield, and headed back home because the war was over. What a wonderful picture for us as believers to think that when we leave this world, the war, the battle with sin, the flesh, the devil, with fallen sinners, with just a world that we don't feel at home in, we are leaving that battle and we're gone. It's over. Third picture that comes to mind when you think of the word depart here is a picture of a man who has been carrying a staggering burden on his shoulder. It's not only a picture of a ship that leaves the harbor sailing to another one, an army that is gathering up its stuff because the battle is over and they're leaving and going back home, but it's also a picture of a man who has been carrying this staggering burden on his shoulder. Now the burden is going to be laid off of his shoulders. It's going to be put down because he's going home. Think about what Paul has on his mind here, this perspective. Paul is a few days away from Nero whacking his head off. And all that can come to his mind here is this perspective. I'm about to set sail. I'm about to break camp. I'm going to lay down this heavy burden. I'm finally going home to be with the Lord. That's what was on his mind. So if you're going to finish well, if I'm going to finish well, you and I have to make sure that we have a present realization between our ears here in this mind of ours. I am a drink offering every day of my life to get up and pour it out for him. And not knowing that I'm not staying here, I'm leaving. It may be like a ship getting ready to take its cruise. It may be like a war coming to an end. And it's like a man who's laying down the burden, and I'm going to go home. That's how he thought. So that's the first thing. If you're going to finish well, Paul would remind us at the end of his life to have a present realization in your mind. Here's the second thing. To finish well, you have to live with a past review. So as I said, he's presently thinking about his life there in prison, in jail, about to die. And now he's going to look back. And you have to have a past review of things. Look back on your life and consider what you see there. Now, let me just remind you about the past. There's this crazy idea that people think the only way you can go forward with all the troubles in your life is if you go back in the past and fix those. That's not what I mean by that. People who try to do that remind me of people who try to drive a car while looking in the rearview mirror all the time. You know what happens when you try to drive your car looking at the rearview mirror all the time? If you do that, you will wreck that sucker. And people who are always, well, that was what happened to me in the past. This is how my mama treated me, my daddy treated me. This is the way I've been treated in American culture or whatever because of your ethnicity. You keep doing that. You're like a guy or a gal looking at the rearview mirror always saying, hey, I'm going to try to go forward while I'm looking back. You'll never go forward. But the Apostle Paul, when he looks back, what he looks back at is the things he was committed to. And he looks back and reviews those things because he wants to remember, as he says in verse 7, something. I have. This is past tense. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. And those three things show us three things that the Apostle Paul really lived for in the past. This is what mattered to him as he looked back. He was going to be remembered as someone who had fought the good fight. And what that means here is that he had a disciplined life. I mean, when you study the life of the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, you will find that he uses words about his life that describe his troubles. They are words like this: I am in distress. I am in tribulation, trials, hardships, troubles. Those don't sound like fun times, and they weren't. So in 2 Corinthians 6, you could write this down, verses 4 and 5. Paul describes, listen to this, what he calls the normal Christian life. This is the way we are called to live, he says. And in that, he describes it like this: but in all these things, approving ourselves as the ministers of God, in much patience, in afflictions, in necessities, in distresses, in stripes, in imprisonments, in tumults, in labors, in watchings, in fastings. In other passages, he spoke of the spiritual opposition that he faced. He faced Satan. He faced the forces of darkness. He faced the indwelling power of his flesh and the spiritual darkness of paganism all around him. I mean, whatever else you can say about Paul's life, you can never say he had an easy one. And what he's doing is he's looking back saying, I fought a good fight. I did not quit. Paul never stopped fighting for Jesus, and he still continued to do that even though he knows the day is coming that he is going to go. So he had a disciplined life. You want to finish well? Look back. Look back and see if that's how you're living. Is that what you're living? Will that keep on carrying through in the new year, a life of discipline, no matter how difficult and how hard it gets? Here's the next thing he says he has done. I have finished the course. And that refers, I think, to what I would like to call his directional life. He had a direction in life. You don't want to read that and think that Paul means I did what I wanted to do. I have finished my course, right? This is not Paul Sinatra, okay? Right? He's not doing it his way. That's not what he means by I have finished my course. What he means is my course was the course God called me to, and I have stayed on that course. My course and his course was the same course. And I have finished the course that the Lord set before me. It wasn't easy, he would say, but looking back, as hard as it was, and I sometimes wondered if I were going to make it, I always knew that I would. And I finished it. I came to an end. That is a direction in life. So he's got a very disciplined life. I'm going to stay after this. I'm going to fight the good fight. And I'm going to keep my life in the course that God sets before me. And that's the direction of my life. The third thing that he looks back and he sees is I have kept the faith. I have kept the faith. And what does he mean by that? I have kept the faith. Well, he's not talking about his personal faith, like I believe in Jesus and that's my faith in Jesus and I'm a Christian. That's not what he means by that. The faith here refers to the body of truth that we hold called the Scriptures. The revelation that God has handed down to us, his voice, his word, him speaking to us. The Apostle Paul looks at that and he says, I not only have had a disciplined life, I have fought the good fight. I've not only had the direction of my life here to finish the course, to never quit, to never give up, but I have also had this life where I kept my commitment to the truth of God and his word. That's called a doctrinal or a doctrinal life. It means that what mattered to him is he kept believing what God said and held to it and lived by it all the days of his life. So you could put it like this. So here's one who fought the good fight. That means he never stopped fighting. Who finished the course, which means he never stopped running. Who kept the faith, which means he never stopped holding on to the truth of God's word. So if we're going to finish well, if we want to have a good end, whether it's this year or in life, you have to first of all live with a present realization. I am an offering, a drink offering to God, and my life will come to an end. Secondly, you have to live with a review of your past and make sure that you are living for the things that matter. That you've run the course that God has set before you. You have lived for Christ. You've held on to his word, and you never let go of believing it and letting it rule your life. All right, one and final thing, last thing. In verse 8, we're going to see that the third thing Paul would be remembered for was not only that he lived with a present realization about his life, a past review that you could look back and see all the days of his life, that's how he was living, but a future reward now he looks at. In verse 8, notice this passage. In the future, right? So in the future, he is going to think about something about the future. Two things. First of all, he's going to think about a day. Notice what it says in verse 8. In the future, and just pause, I'm going to, in my mind, put a parenthesis here. In the future, later we'll talk about there's laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me. But I want to put the first and the ending of that verse together in this way. In the future, on that day. So in the future, now I'm looking ahead. I've looked back at my life. I'm continuing right along those ways. And now I'm looking to the future to make sure that I have my mind focused on what is coming. By faith, he sees that there is a day that's going to be a day like no other day in his life. What will that reward be like? Well, it will be a day that where he says here something is laid up for him. That means it's stored up, laid up, kept for him. And since it's laid up and stored up and kept for him, nothing on this earth can ever take it away. It's a guaranteed thing for him. And it's something glorious, obviously, whatever this is, and we'll see what it is in a moment. It is glorious because it is called a crown of righteousness. What can a crown of righteousness be about? Well, I think it's the very nature of what our entire Christian life is about. You say, what do you mean? Well, everything about our life as believers centers around this issue of righteousness. We are unrighteous as sinners. We are unacceptable. There is none who does good, none that does right. There's none that seeks God. That describes how unrighteous we are. There is nobody going to be good enough anywhere in this world ever who will be able to say, you know, I've done well, I've lived a righteous life, so I'm going to go to heaven. Everybody is unrighteous. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. All of us have sinned. There's not a one that is right. But the Christian message is a message where we get somebody else who does do what is right. You see, I have never lived a life of righteousness. You have never lived a life of righteousness. I mean, you might have taken a stab at it, tried to do pretty good at it, maybe accomplished a few right and good things. But if I looked at the entirety of your life as God would look at the entirety of our lives and said, have you always lived righteous and perfect and sinless? Nobody can raise their hand. except Jesus, right? And Jesus can, because he is the one who came from heaven. We just celebrated this in the Christmas season. Who came to heaven to take on flesh and to be a human being, God in flesh, so that he could have this one goal in mind, and that would be that he would do what we could never do. And first thing we could never do is live a righteous and perfect life. So every day of his life, in his human flesh, with temptation and allurements and everything around him in this world that you and I face, that we give in and show that we are unrighteous, he never gave in to. Can you get your mind around this? I mean, I woke up this morning and some of the most horrible, sinful thoughts were on my mind the moment I woke up and opened my eyes. I mean, my feet hadn't even hit the floor, and I was reminded again how unrighteous I am in myself. And if it was counting on me, I'm going straight to hell before I hit the floor with my feet. But Jesus, every day of his life, gets up, and there's never an unrighteous thought in his mind. There's never any unrighteous actions in his life. He is doing in our place and for us what we could never do, and that is live a righteous and perfect life. He kept every command and demand of God's word and his law, always. Why did he do that? So that by his righteousness, by his life and his works, you and I as sinners who are not righteous could be saved, counting on him, believing on him, putting our faith in him, trusting in him. But Jesus not only lived a righteous life, but he also died the death of unrighteous sinners and for unrighteous sinners. Because you and I, if we get what we deserve, we're all going to hell, and it's an eternity damned and condemned apart from God based on what we deserve. But Christ goes to the cross, and Christ lives. He lives a perfect life, and then goes and dies the death of sinners so that his righteous life could be given to them, and the punishment they deserved could be taken away from them. That whoever believes, whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And let me just encourage you, if you're sitting here this morning and you've come here and you just have never connected those dots, and it's happening in your mind right now that, oh, that's right, I am a sinner. I am grieved over that. I'm convicted over that. I hate that about me. I'm tired of trying to be better and better and better and hoping that God will save me and forgive me and I'll be right and go to heaven. If you're connecting those dots and you're believing right now, this is when you come to him. This is when you become a Christian. And you can do it. And there's a real possibility you might be sitting here and not be a Christian. You might go to church, you might hear the truth, you might be around all the right people, but really on your way to hell. So you have to give up on your righteousness and believe on somebody else's righteousness, which is Christ. So when he thinks about that day and this crown of righteousness, here's what it means. That righteousness was given to us at justification, the moment we believed. He gave us his righteousness. It's called imputed righteousness. He imputed it or put it to our account. You don't have it, but I'm giving you mine. Right? Put to your account. So that's where the righteousness began. And in sanctification, he begins to make us more and more like Christ. And let's call that imparted righteousness. It really becomes a part of our life, right? I mean, we just don't say a prayer, ask Jesus to be our Savior and keep being the same people. No, our life starts looking more like Christ. It starts becoming righteous. That is imparted righteousness. So in the past, you get it when you're genuinely converted, and then throughout the rest of your life on this earth as a believer, progressively, that righteousness is becoming a part of who you are in the present. But that's not the end of it, right? Because there is coming, and here's that day, in the future, on that day, this crown of righteousness. I like to call this implanted righteousness. Permanent, forever righteous. You won't be fighting sin in your flesh. You won't be saying no to temptation so that you can say yes to what's right and reveal Christ in your life. You won't fight that anymore. That battle, that day will be gone forever and ever. And that will be the time when what we got in the past at justification, what we've been experiencing in the present through imparted righteousness, will permanently be an implanted forever righteousness that we are just like Jesus Christ. Can you get that? Somebody said one time, you know what the angels are going to say about all God's people when we get to heaven, when we get to eternity and the final state and all that? They're going to look at each other and say, you know, they all look just like him. That's exactly what's happening. And he is looking forward to that day. That day. It's almost like a crown of perfection now placed on him. So he's got this day. Now let me just wrap it up, because you can tell I'm really excited, right? Okay, I just need to wind it down here. So the second thing he had on his mind was not only a day, but a delight, something that was just thrilling his soul. He says, there is laid up for me on that day, he's talking about the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me. I mean, this is such a specific statement. Which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me. That righteousness, that final state of perfection forever and ever is coming from the Lord, who is the righteous judge, and he's going to give it to me. Can you get your mind around this? Go back to the setting. In just a few days, Nero, the unrighteous earthly ruler, will have Paul beheaded. But in that day, the Lord himself will reverse Nero's earthly judgment. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the universe will weigh in on Paul's case, and his judgment will be final. And it will be personal. Paul won't be awarded this crown by mail, right? And Paul will not receive it direct, will not get it in any way from anybody from a committee bringing it to him. Paul is going to get it directly from the hand of Jesus Christ. Whew. Can you get your mind around that? I mean, that just gets me happy. I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, when I think about looking forward in the future and wanting to end well, that when I realize that that day is coming, that becomes my greatest delight and my greatest joy. That the Lord, the righteous judge, no matter what people have thought about me, no matter what people have said about me or done to me, in the end, the righteous judge is going to say, come here, let me crown you forever with righteousness. Personally. He's not sending an angel to do it for him. It's not just going to be by osmosis. He is going to literally, the Lord himself is going to reward me that way. And as the verse ends in verse 8, it's not just for Paul, but it's for all of us. Not only for me, he says in verse 8, but also to all who have loved his appearing. I mean, this should encourage you, brothers and sisters. The Lord knows how you've lived your life for him. He won't forget it. He knows all about your struggles. He sees how hard the fight is. He knows how you are sometimes tempted to quit and how you keep on going when others around you throw in the towel. He sees and he knows, and in that day the Lord himself is going to be the rewarder to you for your faithfulness. Just picture the Lord himself placing the crown of righteousness on your head. Don't you think that would help you finish well? To run strong in the new year, through the year, into the next year, until your day comes to a conclusion. So how are we going to do that? Well, the first Sunday is here, right, on the calendar. It's the first day. You got 364 left. So how do you make sure you just don't peter out in a few weeks? How do you do that? I think the text helps me to understand how to do this. Number one, you focus on today, right now, this day, day one of this year, on the present realization there is a finish line for me. That was what verse 6 ultimately was saying to us. There is a finish line for me. I mean, don't think you're going to go on forever. I don't want to think I'm going on forever. There is a finish line for me. There's a finish line for you. That's what I'm telling myself. If I've got that notepad and I'm thinking, okay, here's day one. Today, right now, this day, I need to be thinking about this reality. There is a finish line for me. So be a drink offering. Be ready to depart when the Lord calls. Second thing, as I turn the page, I'm going to write. Today, I want to think about this. As I look back and review my life, I want to make sure that certain things are important to me, things that should matter to me. Things like fighting to live for Christ, running the course that God has set before me, holding on to God's word and the standards of Scripture. I want to do that today, right now. So when you go home today, I would encourage you to take these 3 points and say, today, right now, day one, I want to think like this and I want to focus on this. And then turn the page and put a third thing on your page, and that would be think about the future reward that the Lord himself is going to reward you. You say, how's that going to help me? Well, today, obviously, as you said here, I'm confident this passage and this truth has helped us think about running the race well and finishing our course. So you do think on these 3 things today. Now watch what happens tomorrow. You pull that paper up, you think about those same 3 things. And you do that for that week. And you do it for the next week. And you do it for the month. And then you do it for the next month. And you know what happens? This becomes a part of who you are. And it becomes a part of what it means for you to be remembered as you should be remembered as a Christian. This is how Paul would be remembered. This is how we should be remembered as well.